Now we will make a move into our panel so the panellists can start to come forward, and of course this will be emceed by Bioheritage Director Dr. Andrea Byram. But I would first of all like to give thanks for support for this panel has come from Ko Tātou. This is us, Biosecurity 2025. And for us to understand more about Ko Tātou, we have a video that will give us some insight on from their incredible website. Tēnā koe.
Dear Aotearoa, dear home, with every turn of the tide, every seam of the seasons, look around at all we have, this plentiful way of life. This place is more than a setting of my story. I was grown on its meat and milk, healed by its plants. My hands have dug kumara from its soil, my feet tuatua from the sand. This fragile place is all we've got. It's vulnerable to pests and diseases, so we must guard as if our way of life depends on it, because it does. As my last sunset creeps over the edge of our precious island, I'll be asking one thing of you. Look after it, protect it. Aotearoa, this is us.
Thank you. So, no mai anō, ko Andrea Byram tōku ingoa. We're here to discuss the security in biosecurity. What can we learn from other technology, intelligence and surveillance sectors? And as you have just seen, this panel is sponsored by Ko Tātou. So in the last 12 to 18 months, Aotearoa New Zealand has been dealing with a number of high-profile biosecurity incursions, not to mention the ones that haven't hit the media. Our primary industries and our natural ecosystems are highly dependent on having a world-class biosecurity system, but unquestionably that means a strategic investment in the latest cutting-edge technologies and strategies. The word biosecurity has two parts to it, bio and security. However, all too often we focus on the bio bit and we don't think very much about what the security bit actually means for us. Today we're going to consider that topic in a bit more depth. What can we learn from security technology and surveillance sectors? What iwi hapu perspectives on security are out there? And is there a place to apply the latest security and defence thinking to protect our biological heritage? To discuss this with me today is a fantastic lineup of panellists that include representatives from industry, tech sector, a kaitiaki from Taitokoro, two scientists and who have been grappling with novel technologies in the biosecurity space. Now, we did meet before, and the panel was somewhat in danger of groupthink. So I did, and in fact, they even swapped business cards, some of them. So I did encourage them to be a little bit provocative and present different perspectives. And I would encourage you to do the same at this tail end of the day. I know it's the last session of the day, however, bear with us. This should be an exciting one. So what I'm going to do now is briefly introduce each of our panellists, and then I'm going to ask them to make a short statement, and they are actually being timed. They know they can't speak for longer than 2 minutes each. And then I'll segue into a question from each of them. After that, we're expecting questions from the floor. So first of all, I'd love to introduce Waitangi Wood. Waitangi is of Ngāti Awa and Ngāpuhi Nui Tonu descent. She hails from Ngāti Rua Hapu and Taupō Marae. Inspired by Māori difference and tenacity, Waitangi has worked across a number of sectors, which include iwi hapu environmental and biosecurity management, iwi and hapu strategic development and Māori public health. Her expertise includes strategic communications and public relations, policy and quality systems development and implementation, Māori cultural indicators and frameworks, program evaluation, Māori community engagement and relationship building, iwi, hapu and whānau sustainable development, and the development and application of frameworks centric to Māori values. She is currently a tangata whenua rōpū representative on the governance of the Kauri Dieback Response Program. And Waitangi has worked with us in Bioheritage on a number of different research projects, guiding and helping scientists connect with tangata whenua, particularly in Taitokoro. Next up, Dr. Steve Pawson, here too to my left. Steve's from Scion. He's a forest entomologist with a strong interest in protecting natural biodiversity. He specialises in the interaction between plantation management, landscape ecology and invertebrate biodiversity. Recently, he's been working in the interface between technology and biology with projects looking at active tracking of insects in flight, development of cyborgs for aerial odour detection, sounds cool, and mobile phone applications for biosecurity surveillance. Steve also supports industry efforts to help alternative phytosanitary measures to maintain market access for New Zealand's wood products. Next up, we have Nadine Tunley, down the end there. Nadine, Ngāi Tahu, Ngāti Wheke, Ngāti Waewae, has a long career in the primary food sector, largely in export and international markets, particularly pip fruit, seafood, meat and dairy. She's the CEO of Oha Honey, the Ngāi Tahu-owned Manuka honey business. Nadine has spent much of her career focused on startups, business development, international trade, finance, logistics and administration. Nadine has a strong knowledge of global export markets, and she's currently the director of Blink Innovation, and a member of the Primary Sector Council. Immediately on my left here is Sam Vai. Sam's the co-founder of the Kiwi startup Environmental and Conservation Technologies, or ECT, which develops and provides services using drones and autonomous technology for conservation projects. ECT uses a wide range of drone platforms to provide expert services, including drone aerial baiting, monitoring, weed and vegetation mapping and surveying. Recently in the Galapagos, ECT completed the world's first island application of rodent bait using drones. Sam has a history of developing and managing environmental projects using innovative technologies in various sectors, including conservation, mineral exploration, mining, and oil and gas. And last but not least, I'd love to welcome Dr. Tara Strand. Tara from Scion specialises in modelling the dispersion of particles in the atmosphere. She's worked on fire behaviour, aerial spray application, pheromone dispersion, disease spread, and pesticide deposition and drift for pest control programs. Tara's expertise in turbulent air movement and atmospheric science have recently been applied to biosecurity in a program called the Toolkit for the Urban Battlefield. Tara is one of the newest members of the Bioheritage Challenge Strategic Leadership Group. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to hand over to the panel to make a brief statement. As I said, I'll time them at 2 minutes each, and then we'll go from there. Thanks. So first of all, Sam, over to you.
Brilliant. All right, thank you, Andrea. Awesome to be here and see all the faces in front of me. So from my angle, ECT, it's Environment and Conservation Technologies, is a bit of a mouthful, so ECT is nice and short. We're totally a private company looking at utilising, bringing in technology from other industries, be it agriculture, military, coming out of horticulture as well, and really identifying what technologies or sort of platforms, drone platforms, whether it's up in the air, on the land, or in the water, underwater or on the water, and how those can be applied correctly to biosecurity. Certainly, I think the adaptation of technology implementation within New Zealand is pertinent towards the success and hitting the PF 2050 goals. We've got a few projects underway at the minute, which are developing pretty nicely, and I think some more projects might be underway after chatting with these guys, with Tara and Steve. Keep my business card, don't throw it in the bin. And so yeah, some really, really brilliant sort of development projects, what we're working on at the minute, but specifically about identifying technology in other industries and bringing it into New Zealand's biosecurity region. Additionally, on the other half of that, we also provide services. So a bit of a sales spiel. If anyone needs some drone services, then shout and I'll send a business card by paper aeroplane.
Do you think we're being innovative enough and thinking outside of the box enough in this biosecurity tech space?
Sure, I think certain certain funds are assisting, and you know, like for example, the people sat next to me as well. Everyone is certainly assisting in the development towards increasing the tools available for a toolkit for eradication project managers. Things such as the National Science Challenges, these sort of funds are pertinent towards correctly achieving the right tools which we need. To sort of move forwards, any other assistance would be, well, Steve, you hit it on the nut before, is money. It's always good to have additional funds because trying to sell to our engineers hopes and dreams only lasts for so long before they need a salary.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, next along is Steve. So Steve, over to you. Have a little say in what you would like to put out there for the audience.
Right, well, I don't think it's all about the money, but so biosecurity to me is biological security. I'm a biologist. Biology, and I've said it to audiences before, you've probably heard me banging this drum, it's an observational science. As biologists, we take observations. How we're going to change things is taking observations in different ways, and biologists don't generally do that. That's what the other technology, intelligence and surveillance sectors can provide for us, new ways of making those observations. And who wouldn't like some of the new innovations that are coming out, sort of sub-millimetre size IoT sensors that are solar-powered, computer-controlled, got comms, got a sensor on them, and they're sub-millimetre in size. It's just craziness. So the technology, intelligence, surveillance sectors are going to bring us a lot of things in terms of new ways of making observations about the biological world. But that's only one half of it. So if we think of the Security Intelligence Service, we think of James Bond, we think of Q down there creating all these whiz-gazmos out of watches and that. There's the other half to the surveillance intelligence industry, which is the human intelligence part of it. It's the soft skills. And speaking to people who have worked for like the NZSIS, etc., that's a big part of their business, is understanding people, understanding how to bring people aligned with your cause and your way of thinking. And I think from a biosecurity perspective, if we want to build these teams of 4.7 million, we need those kinds of technology or that kind of knowledge into our system as well.
Do you think in the science sector we're able to be responsive and nimble enough to the emergence of those kinds of technologies?
I think there's pockets of it. So I think particularly in the commercial startups, the innovators, companies like Sam's, I think there's definitely a lot of that. They have to survive. If they don't bring in this new technologies, where's their point of difference? I think in the more established organisations like the CRIs and the universities, again, it's in pockets. I would really challenge those organisations, be it a CRI or a university, if you have the multidisciplinary departments like, say, an engineering faculty, a computer science faculty, as well as a biology faculty, why the heck are the three not getting in the room? Often there's engineers that are researching passionately around something you've never heard of, and they're developing a solution looking for a problem. And they want to be able to take that technology and say, we can adapt it here and be able to demonstrate how it might be used. And they're more than often willing to say, I want to choose a biological problem. So I don't think it's necessarily all about the money, but it's about that collaboration, bringing those people together in the one place and saying biosecurity is our focal point of where we should be trying to apply these technologies as a use case.
Kia ora, thank you. Tara.
Yes, I just wanted to say some comments on the security in biosecurity. When Andrea brought this topic up, I did look up the definition of security with Google there, and it's the state of being free from threat. And so if you think about this, this is a really strong word, the state of being free from threat. Now, to provide security, you need skill, and you need skill to observe, as Steve has pointed out, but you need to identify that threat. Once you observe it, you need to make sure you've identified it. It is a threat. You need to eliminate it. You need to know where it is, how it's located, and then you need to have the skill to eliminate or mitigate it. Now, what does that mean? What are we trying to keep free from threat? Well, it's New Zealand's diverse native ecosystems, and it's our primary industry. And I think when we look towards the future and trying to future-proof our native species and our primary sector, we have to go into the areas of mass technology, miniaturization, really going forward into data openness. I think that topic came up earlier. We have to share data. We have to be free data flowing. We have to be informed. And we have to bring in, as Steve has mentioned, the 4.7 million people that can observe and locate that threat as it comes across our borders.
Thanks, Tara. It'd be actually quite good if 4.7 billion people could get on the biosecurity bandwagon. Okay, over to you, Nadine.
So I'm probably the capitalist in the room, having listened to the last couple of speeches, so I actually bring a slightly different twist, and hence why I think I'm here. Interestingly, I do sit on the board of a couple of other companies as well, and having listened to some of the previous speakers, the reality around commercial challenges versus the good of our future, really. It's going to take a long time. I mean, in this room, really, I sat there thinking you're probably preaching to the converted. And it's how we get out there and speak to everyone else, even with the security around biosecurity. Amount of times that I've come through the immigration line in Auckland or Christchurch or wherever I'm flying into, and I've got other Kiwis in front of me, and I can hear their conversations about, I've got this little trinket from wherever. It's wood, it's shell, it's whatever. It breaches all of the little arrival card things, but if I just hide it, they won't know. So we can't even get New Zealanders to understand the importance of it, because I don't think we've communicated well enough at home. So I think, there's a huge amount of work to be done just here in New Zealand to get the 4.7 to actually understand and to all understand the responsibility of security. Technology is a fantastic thing, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in this space, but in reality it's like anything. If you can't get the basics right and the systems and the procedures around that, first of all the technology in the world actually just adds to the confusion sometimes. From a iwi perspective, yes, I work for a large iwi corporation subsidiary business and in charge of that. As a whole iwi group, we've taken steps towards how we will respond to the climate change issues facing us currently. But at the end of the day, and I'll say it here, it's a challenge. As the CEO, I'm put under pressure to return a certain result every year based on a percentage for the investment invested in our company. To align that with what our environmental needs are and how we respond is a real challenge. So, it is unfortunately early days in the conversations for everybody, if everyone's honest, around how we face the dilemma between the financial responsibilities we hold as well as the climatic and diversity and everything that we have at risk. But it's how we accelerate those conversations and everyone facing the truth about them, really. Biosecurity shouldn't be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And somewhat, for me as an exporter, it is about protecting our shores and making sure things don't come into New Zealand. But globally, as I travel, if you think about it, if you travel yourselves, how many countries do you enter that we fill in as extensive an arrival card as we do for New Zealand and Australia? Not very many. So that actually tells you that for us to try and educate the rest of the world is a massive challenge, and it will come down to technology, unfortunately, for foreign visitors and other measures that we take.
Thank you. Do you think we're nimble enough at adopting these new technologies, new approaches, new strategies?
Nimble always comes up against financial again, in reality. So the technologies that we have to use aren't cheap. 3D imaging, X-ray machines, etc. And to a degree, you always have to, financial, everything's financial. You have to test against the investment made versus what results we're actually seeing from those things. So, having listened to the previous speaker, bigger issues probably are around policy and legislative changes. What are our consequences for people who breach our borders and do things knowingly or unknowingly? It's hard to tell. It's kind of like a wet bus ticket sometimes. So nanny state isn't the answer, but unfortunately when you're trying to shift such a big grouping of people to understand the consequences, because that's the reality. Consequences often aren't understood until you start to think, why does this affect me? And then people look into it. So you do have to think about behavioural changes and how you force that change.
Thank you. And last but not least, I'll invite the lovely Waitangi to make some comment.
Kia ora koutou. First, I'd just like to acknowledge the kaumātua and rangatira from Te Tai Tokerau and Tūhoi that are here. Kia ora koutou. And also with the kaitiaki from, that are here from Te Tai Tokerau. Kia ora Dave, ngā mihi ki a koe. I think that's prevalent of the situation within biosecurity. I mean, given that it only took me a minute to do that, and the reflection in the room. I struggled with this conversation about, surveillance and biosecurity, because surveillance actually is a blocker for Māori participation in anything to do with biosecurity. Surveillance sits in the part, and it's assumed that agencies and researchers and people who develop things have status in the development of those things, and very rarely, after the resources and funding is invested in talking about surveillance, Māori they don't actually have any opportunity to utilise whatever that surveillance information is, because it's housed and by agencies who gather it and organisations that hold it. That surveillance information is actually about us and our taonga species, and at the moment we are trying to progress those conversations about cultural appropriateness and cultural authority and sovereign authority, and I would like to acknowledge that there are some in the room, Nari Williams and some of our staff, some of the people from Plant and Food, Becky Ganley and Albie Marsh, that have picked up the tohu on that, or the torch on that, and been proactive in working with Māori to try and find ways to find a common ground for that. So I want to acknowledge that. I was at an Indigenous conference, so what I was going to say was different. I actually Googled as well. I was going to go on about actually we're native. You're supposed to protect us, the Māori, because we are the nature. And the speaker before us, Vicky talked about, there was a question, who is the voice of nature? Well, that's Māori, that's us. And that people sat here arguing about each other, saying that, oh no, it's DOC, oh it's MPI, no, council should be the person who's that. That was really interesting to me, because this is part of the issue with the management of our environment, of our natural environment. There's this assumption that there's already assumed authority, which negates the authority and the recognition that you have Indigenous people in your country that were here first, and that you are receiving value from. I was at an Indigenous conference, and there were a number of groups from Australia, Canada, and Hawaii, and it was about marine biosecurity, and what was startling to me was how advanced Māori are, how sophisticated we are in terms of our relationships with you, in terms of business. I've got a capitalist over here. In terms of Māori in science who work with you and are your colleagues, who are able to articulate these conversations. In other countries, they're way behind us. I am being ethnocentric. But the conversations, they're still struggling with identity conversations. We struggle with that, but in a different context. We're trying to say to you, we are not all New Zealanders. We are not a submitter or a stakeholder. You are privileged. You are privileged to be scientists and people who work with Māori, who have the opportunity to work with Māori. And I realised on my way here that actually that's the thing that I think I would like to highlight in the conversations we're having, is that you need to recognise that privilege.
So, just to bring it back to the security and biosecurity, Waitangi,
kia ora.
Thinking about the kaitiaki that are out there working in the Ngāhere, do you think there's an opportunity there for that to be turned into a surveillance opportunity, and for us to learn a bit more about what kind of information we're getting from people, what kind of early warning systems we could create from that kind of opportunity?
Good lead, love that. Thanks, Andrew. I think the thing is that there's an assumption that Māori don't know what biosecurity is, and that we don't have these methodologies and ways of looking after our ngāhere that you articulate the way that you want to articulate them. I think the issue is more about where Māori sit within the biosecurity system that enables the use of those surveillance tools or methodologies. And unfortunately, we're at the end where you ask a question, you develop a fantastic tool or method or approach, which is supposed to tell us where the incursion is so that we can manage it. And then at the end of your 4-year, multi-million-dollar project, you ask another question and you don't operationalise the surveillance because you haven't tested it. There's no investment in that. And that's where Māori are. And we're constantly waiting to be part of that conversation. And so, I think the thing is that we're already doing it. We already know what we're doing. We have people who no longer want to share their mātauranga with scientists and researchers because it takes too long. And so it's more about, I think, finding ways to engage in the conversation earlier in the biosecurity system and in the science system to encourage Māori participation and engagement. Because it benefits you, and it benefits us, and it benefits our taonga.
Kia ora. So I just had a quick look at the app and cheated, so I knew there were heaps of questions coming through from all of you. So I thought I would get it rolling with questions from the floor. Can people please name the person that your question is for? But anyway, I'm going to pitch this one to Steve. What technology or approach has the biggest potential for New Zealand biosecurity? And of course, anyone else on the panel is most welcome to answer it too.
I think probably the biggest potential technologies are those that link other technologies together. So people have possibly heard of the Internet of Things, so it's about low-powered wireless networks and work over large areas, of which there are hundreds or thousands of sensors you can tack on them. There's probably sensors for sensors you can tack onto them. I think it's some of those fundamental underpinning technologies which are going to enable so many more things to happen, as opposed to just one sensor for a particular thing.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that as well. In terms of approach or a system, the integration of multi-sensor definitely will provide a huge tool. But also taking that one step further into an entire sort of system or a collaborative system. I saw Grant Ryan cruising around earlier, I think, whether he's still around or he's hiding. Many of you all know the Cacophony Project. It's things like that which are enabling crowd platforms or crowdsources or multi-collaboration, like Steve alluded to a few minutes ago as well, about how we can all work together. We can get ecologists, other remote sensing scientists, we can get engineers involved, land management specialists involved as well throughout that collaboration in a systematic approach to provide a better tool.
Thank you. Question here from Nadine. How do iwi address the double-headed monster syndrome, where commercial imperatives don't align with intergenerational environmental imperatives? No pressure.
No, that's okay. I actually think it's a question for both Waitangi and I to both respond to. From my perspective, the reality is we have to be bold and we have to walk the talk, really. For us, there will be commercial decisions made that we will sacrifice income to be able to achieve those environmental imperatives. That's just a negotiation that we have to have internally. From a commercial perspective, the way the tribe's structured for us, commercial is quite clearly one side, tribal is the other. I technically sit in commercial, but there's quite a few strategies that Ngāi Tahu's put in place to address that. Reality is we will sacrifice income, that won't be avoided.
Okay, let's flick back. Okay, so I think the thing is to engage Māori early and to understand that there's differences between those Māori, and that to invest at the front end of the engagement with Māori in terms of those conversations as opposed to the back end, and don't homogenise iwi with other iwi.
Thank you. We'll go to the social licence question because it is a big one. It always comes up in biosecurity. It's one of the biggest challenges. What can we learn from these other sectors to solve social challenges, especially around acceptance of tool use? And I suspect that it's not just Steve, but also Tara might have some comment on that. In fact, all of the panel.
I don't really have an answer for it, I'm sorry. I'm not a social scientist, although I do, what I know from developing some technological tools is putting the technology stack together is the easy bit. Often they come with programming languages that are well documented. They come with specification technical documents for the sensors, etc., whatever it is, and you can package it all together, and there you go. The question is, how do you get people to use it? It's always the big $1 million question. And I don't know the answer to that. I think we have to link more with people whose whose focus it is to get people to use things. So social marketers, the big marketing firms, they have strategies and ways of making you buy what you didn't think you wanted to buy. Maybe we need to look to some of those sectors for inspiration. I think it's going to come from many different places, but I can't give you an answer, I'm afraid.
I would like to comment. I guess my comment is it's about the journey, and it's the learning journey. So yes, we receive these big funded projects and we initiate the project. In my experience, it's important to bring as many people involved as soon as possible onto that learning journey and to share that journey, share the ups, share the downs, share the obstacles and the decisions made, and just talk it through and then develop a way to share that decision point. Why did you decide, say, in my case, to go with an aerial spraying drone rather than a helicopter? Share that decision point to the public, to the outgoing sector, and to develop a way to share that. So it's not just about the science, it's not just about the technology, it's bringing people on board from the very beginning and doing that learning process with everyone. I'm learning, why not have everyone else learn at the same time?
I'll just add on a point for Tara's point there. Definitely. So the bringing people on and making sure the communication stream is very clear. I think everyone in the room knows a project where potentially that in the past that communication stream wasn't there, which led to failure. What we've noticed in our sort of background of projects on especially the use of innovative tools, for example, a big drone conducting aerial baiting. It's always a key of weighing up pros and cons versus the new method versus the old traditional method of whether it's let's go hand baiting, or are we going to use bait stations, or are we going to use manned helicopter for aerial baiting, or depending on the project, whatever it is. And it's that pro versus con for each of the stage, which may or not implicate different people through that communication stream as well.
Kia ora, thank you. So we've got a question from one of our international panel. It's great to see them interacting with these sessions. So from Phil Cassie, New Zealand's adopted an onshore shared responsibility approach. Is enough being done to ensure offshore emerging threats are being similarly handled? Nadine, do you want to comment on that? You've done a lot of global work, so. And particularly bringing it back to the kaupapa of the session, of course, which is around, emerging intelligence or security technologies that we could adopt. Just to make it even harder.
To get international participation, you have to get agreement. And so that's some of the challenges we have. From a biosecurity perspective, we could do a lot more if we can get the countries that we're bringing product in from to agree to some of our conditions and terms. That is not an easy thing to achieve. Some of the issues we've had, even in the last couple of years with, for me, stink bug is one that I'm aware of. We import machinery, tractors, various things out of other countries. As much as MPI tries and as much as the New Zealand government tries, we ask for these things to happen. But if the countries that are sending don't agree, then it doesn't happen. One interesting example where it worked quite well, a very big company in the horticulture industry had an order of 80 tractors out of Italy coming to New Zealand. They threatened to cancel that order if certain things weren't done on the other side to ensure that those tractors would be free of certain pests and diseases. Again, that's reality, financial situation. That company wanted to sell the 80 tractors. They were going to do anything they could to fulfil that requirement, and that's where it becomes difficult. So if government doesn't have that ability to leverage that situation, they struggle. So again, it's somehow how you bring commercial and aspirational pieces together to actually affect change. It's hard to do.
Thank you. Steve, did you want to comment on that?
Next month I'll be in Australia to discuss just that kind of thing, and that internationally, by and large, many countries are all buying and trading the same goods from the same country. So we import a container load of X from a country, and so does Australia, so does Canada, so does America. And we monitor certain numbers of stuff at our border, but we can't identify everything. But everyone else is looking at containers that arrive at their border, and lucky for New Zealand, we're so isolated that everyone else kind of gets their containers first. So if we can have some kind of international clearinghouse for just images of what people are finding on containers, we can start getting a little bit of an early warning system saying, well, actually, things coming from this particular factory, this particular place, we need to take a slightly closer look to them. So we're going to look to see if we can get a little prototype system of that going with the Australians next month.
Can I add two, please?
Please keep going, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add that while, I guess, as Nadine pointed out, it's really hard to get other countries to comply, but there are organizations within New Zealand that at least canvass and observe and watch what's happening on the horizons within this challenge and within better border biosecurity. There's lots of scientists and operations and folks in the commercial industry that do go overseas and watch and interact and bring that information back home. So I think New Zealand's actually really quite forward in gaining that intelligence and gaining that information.
I just wanted to say that we actually have been focusing, Māori generally, have been focusing on strengthening our Indigenous networks in terms of things like looking at sentinels and what is actually affecting other species overseas, so that we can get a heads up before it actually arrives here. We find that the notification to our people is too late because we're to be able to plan or organise ourselves. So that's something certainly we're focusing on.
Actually, that probably is a good segue into the next couple of questions I was going to bring up. There was one there on, which has disappeared, but it was asking you to introduce Te Tere Whakamātaki and its role, but also the comment that you're so right, Māori and Pākehā are ahead of where the rest of the world are. I'd hesitate to say other Indigenous people, but rather than feeling privileged, what can we all do together? So kind of rolling up a couple of concepts in one, and then before I let you speak, I'm going to also put in a plug for the networking session after this, which is led by Te Tere Whakamātaki. So you can also learn more about them there. Kia ora.
Okay. So we have many iterations of Te Tere Whakamātaki because we're constantly changing, and I think the fact that we've got that agility is a testament to the group that organises us. And I'd just like to acknowledge Melanie Mark-Shadbolt, who's sitting over here. She's our CEO, and Tame, who does a lot of our ground and grunt work. So ngā kia kōrua. Te Tere Whakamātaki was established after we talked to Māori about whether or not they wanted to be part of discussions or policy or regulation or anything to do with the biosecurity system. Obviously, the conversations were quite early, and it's like many people and people in our communities, they don't know the difference between biodiversity and biosecurity, and I think Te Tere Whakamātaki has certainly increased the awareness about what biosecurity is, and our conversation is that without biosecurity you don't have biodiversity, and so there's a nice lend for us in terms of our conversations around protection and taking care of our environment and our taonga. The idea is to take away the middle people who are doing things and link Māori who are affected by incursions, or are most affected, directly with those who hold knowledge, which is you guys, because we don't have experience of those things that come into New Zealand. You are the experts. You are the ones working in the fields, and so it's to bring you closer, but also for us to communicate and articulate our own solutions across regions so that we're able to find and work on our own solutions to protect our species while agencies, etc., are working on solutions. Primarily, our work is to strengthen the relationships of kaitiaki and rangatiratanga, and also to inform those policies, strategies, and various reviews that impact on our ability to do that.
Thanks. And if you want to know more, please come to the networking session tonight. So there's a question here for Sam, Steve, and Tara. Where do molecular technologies fit? Is there enough cross-fertilisation between disciplines? That's actually two different questions. Bill, you cheated, wherever you are. But anyway, I suspect that's a question for all the panel. Where do the new technologies, molecular technologies fit?
I'd like to lead that off, if I may.
Sure.
I think in the space of pathogens, we're really behind the times. Pathogens are very difficult to work with because they are down in the molecular range. And I think we really need to push that space forward and modernize our observations for those pathogens and how we can respond to those pathogens when they do cross the border, even to the point where maybe it's even a regional thing. So we can actually do regional exceptions to market access. You could divide it by island, or even more so by valleys that are divided by terrain, for example. So there is definitely a future where we need to go into the molecular technologies and advance that phase. And I don't believe there's enough cross-fertilization, especially into the areas of engineering, atmospheric science, soil science, etc. I think that there's a whole point of intersection that actually needs to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. I'll hand it over.
I was just going to second that.
Okay.
Well, I guess
Waitangi.
it depends wherever you are as to what your definition of biosecurity there and what you're talking about. If it's surveillance and identification and detection, then sure, molecular technologies are going to be huge. You look at some of the new miniaturized things like the little Oxford MinION, little tiny sequencer this big that you can use in the field if you want to. Those kind of technologies are going to be very, very useful. Various other things like that. If you're then getting into using it in terms of long-term pest management and molecular technologies, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. And sure, there could well be room there for the long-term vision for predator-free 2050 in molecular technologies, but there could also be other technologies that aren't molecular-based, things like AI camera systems for detecting a pest that walks past and then squirting it with a little substance that they lick off and subsequently demise from this world. So, it all depends on, what you think is of biosecurity there.
Okay, thank you. Next one's an interesting one. Is New Zealand a buyer or a maker of new transformative technologies? Thank you, Linda. So what areas should we invest in as a nation to build the skills and capability versus leave it to others? Good question. Anyone want to comment on that?
I think there's a lot of factors to that question, a lot of factors. Personally, we're both a buyer and maker. We adjust technology which we procure from elsewhere around the world and some in New Zealand, but particularly I think there's a lot of academic guys here. Academia is doing a really, really good job in New Zealand at providing the personnel. However, those graduates and guys after finishing their PhDs do can leave New Zealand pretty quickly, especially if you leave as a mechatronics engineer. It's quite easy to get sucked into a Silicon Valley approach around. So, in what areas should we build local skills and capabilities? It's a really difficult one to answer, but as a small private company, we would like to see more funding for developing technologies which are going to provide a bigger impact for the dollar spent. Anyone else?
It's a little bit random, but I think the thing around anything to do with introducing something new or looking at New Zealand is recognised. I mean, in the conversations I've had with people from overseas, New Zealand is recognised as being able to be adaptive and to provide amazing technologies and new ways of working. And most of you will have multiple relationships with people from overseas because of our ability to be able to do that. The cultural context must be considered. Because quite often, because there is such a enthusiasm and an appetite to look at new things and to bring in new ways of doing things and to be innovative, the cultural context is left out because there isn't any consideration that Māori have a value, are able to contribute value. And in these conversations we're having, I can see Māori value in all of them. And I think maybe that we need to expand that conversation when we're looking at those technologies, because certainly overseas, other countries are coming on board in finding solutions that are informed by their discussions with their Indigenous people.
Kia ora, thank you. I'm going to come back to the ethical question, but I'm going to hijack the system slightly and ask the question about how long is a piece of string from Tess? Is New Zealand biosecurity sufficiently funded to protect our borders with or without improvements in technology? Interesting question.
I'll lead out with that one. So, sufficiently funded. And no disrespect to the scientists in the room, but the reality is we can always do more. And you can always want more funding to do more. That's a reality. But we have the funding we have to a large degree. And yes, we advocate for more, we fight for more. We can add taxes, we can do all sorts of things, but in reality, if, just like any other scenario where there's funding required, you have to be creative within what we've got as well. And so, again, that responsibility comes back to all of us, everyone in this room. So, yep, we could always do with more funding, there's no doubt about it, but funding's what it is, and we have to find the solutions within that those parameters that we have.
So do you think we're adding enough value to current investments or funding?
Again, you know, what's the return on investment of those? Are they doing what we actually set out to achieve, what we wanted to be done? You know, there's some basic things that don't cost a huge amount that I think we're not doing. So.
If I can comment on that one, I think as a relatively low cog in the wheel of science, the university and everything, I think it's a little easier for people like Roger Smith, head of Biosecurity New Zealand, to go to government, go direct to cabinet and say, we've got a problem, we've got a new incursion from something, you know, and the adage is pretty much, please sir, can I have some more? You know, I need another 10 million, I need 70 million for pain apple moth, I need 750 million for M. bovis, you know, I need money to deal with the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. I think he finds it harder to go to cabinet and say, please sir, can I have some money to build that fence at the top of the cliff? I think that's much harder business case for him to make, or it just, you know, we're more reactionary, I think, as a country rather than proactive in building that border. I think it's just harder to do.
I just want to. So I think the issue. I don't think anyone will ever say there's enough. I don't think it's about anyone ever saying it's enough. I think it's more about, which you touched on, is whether or not what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve with that money and those resources is actually the end point that saves nature, that saves the thing that you're supposed to be saving, or maps where the disease front is, or whatever. And I think that that's where there's a failing, because it's almost like even if things aren't working, you still continue to resource and fund it. And the other thing too is I think within the science system, even though there's a collegiate nature amongst agencies, in some cases Māori, and certainly science and researchers, there's still this competitiveness, there's still a competitive angle, which I think it sometimes inhibited some of the innovation, the ability to take those resources and adapt them in a really cohesive way that that provide the solution to what you're trying to find or what you're trying to do. Sometimes conflicts of interest come into account with that, and as a result of that, that also inhibits your ability to go forward. Meanwhile, you're still generating and trying to get money. And then one final thing is that we're looking at money within biosecurity, but actually if we're looking at the environment, what we have is multiple silos that spend a lot of time talking about how we're looking after nature, but they're all siloed. And sometimes there's duplication, and sometimes there's gaps. I don't want to say don't do a gap analysis on the natural sector, that would be horrendous, but I'm just saying that in considering going forward, that there should be some sort of collaborations across sectors so that actually you're able to utilise that budget more effectively.
Thank you. Okay, with less than 5 minutes to go, there are a heap of very interesting questions on the screen. So I'm going to upvote the devious one about humans, technologies and biosecurity technologies and unscrupulous humans, and throw that open to the entire panel for comment and or thoughts on that.
Interestingly, that one caught my eye quite a while ago. Unscrupulous. I mean, at the end of the day, shit, everyone's scared, Big Brother, all these things. And it's such a, you can debate this one forever, it's kind of like religion and politics. The reality is, if you've done nothing wrong yourself, what are you worried about? Like, seriously, if they want to read my emails or look into my life, go for gold. If it's going to protect New Zealand and the environment that my children and my grandchildren, if I ever have them, live in, I really don't care. And government doesn't exist in my mind to do those things. I think they've got a whole lot of bigger issues to worry about than those kind of things, but hey, that's just my opinion.
I would just put forward that probably all that technology has been developed by defence and already in use, so I don't think biosecurity is your worry.
Yeah, just to add to that, yeah, some of the technology we're looking at is foliage penetrating radar, or at least there's a horizon scanning piece going on at the minute, almost right at the minute. And that technology has been actually down the road, but there's a meeting down the road which my colleague's at. But that technology has been around for like, specifically what we're looking at introducing to conservation, which is like mind-blowing for a lot of people, it will be an amazing boost to detect predators through foliage, through forest canopy without having to think about, it will thermal work, we can't see past a tree because we've got thermal, on a drone going over it. But yeah, that technology has been around for about 10 or 15 years. It's just been with various countries' military around the world. So finally, we're able to actually scrape off a little bit from the bottom to use for biosecurity purposes.
Real quick, I'm just going to say that, real quick. I'm just going to say that the biosecurity technologies, for the most part, are actually work against Māori. They're actually, if you're looking at unscrupulous governments, I don't think it's unscrupulous. I think it's that they're just not present. So a lot of the biosecurity methodologies and tools that are being developed, for example, knowing where Cody is, for Cody dieback. Māori know where Cody is. Go and talk to a Māori. Don't spend time on, investing in a scientist to go and fly over and do a whole heap of things. It's the simple things like that. And I think that there needs to be someone said an and. I mean, I don't like that conversation, but obviously there has to be somewhere we have a common ground where we recognise that Māori actually do know about their forests and their taonga, and they're intimate with that. And biosecurity is supposed to take into account everything in the nature, and Māori are nature.
Right, with less than 2 minutes to go, the myrtle rust question is by far the most popular, so that's the one I'm going to ask. I'm going to throw it open to the whole panel. If we could go back in time, did you notice how I used the word we? Could go back in time, is there something that could have been done to prevent myrtle rust? I suspect the operative word is prevent.
I'll start
Tara.
as the atmospheric scientist. So myrtle rust came in on the winds, and so the answer to that is prevention is no, it would cross our borders sooner or later. I think my thoughts on myrtle rust is perhaps there could have been conversations, as we talked about here, looking into the future, knowing that it was sitting in Australia, knowing that yes, it would eventually cross our borders. What's the plan? Start engaging with the communities that know perhaps the most about the species that it would to attack. Try to put those things in place ahead of time. I think it caught us on our hind feet, and hopefully that doesn't happen again.
Kia ora. Well, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, Tara, and thank you. Please join me in thanking all of the panel for this amazing session. Kia ora.